thanks. Like, hey, Scoob, did you hear Nikki Blake is hosting a Scooby-Doo panel? No. Yeah. Like on today's Scooby-Doo episode, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy meet Nikki Blake. Yeah, and a Scooby Panel. Like, we need to get this puppy started. Okay, Nikki Blake, take it away, Scooby-Doo.
Welcome to the Scooby Panel. I'm your host, Nikki Blake from ScoobyAddicts.com, and today we're talking about the shows that are modeled after Scooby-Doo. Before we begin, I'll have everyone introduce themselves, and Wendy will start with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy BRYDGE. I'm a commissioned artist, and I've been collecting Scooby for, let's say, almost 40 years. Let's bump it up to that. Why not?
Joel.
Hey there, I'm Joel from the YouTube channel Plant Scooby.
And Scott.
I'm Scott Jeralds. I'm an Emmy award-winning animation producer and director. I worked at Hanna-Barbera for a long time, and I've been a Scooby fan for about 55 years now.
Excellent. See, we're all Scooby fans. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
So we are talking about the shows that are modeled after Scooby-Doo, and those shows include Josie and the Pussycats, The Funky Phantom, The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, Butch Cassidy, Goober and the Ghost Chasers, Speed Buggy, Inch High Private Eye, Clue Club, Jabberjaw, Dynomutt, Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, The Buford Files, Fangface, and The New Shmoo. So in general, what do you guys think of these shows? Wendy?
This turned out to be way more of like an intense thinking project than what I anticipated it would be. I'm so surprised at how many of these I had never seen before. Some of them I'd actually never heard of before. I think out of all of these shows, the only two that I've actually watched an episode or two of is The New Shmoo and Fangface. After we talked to Jerry, I absolutely wanted to. He's so proud of Fangface that I wanted to check that out. So I've watched the entirety of that series, and it's quite good. And of course, Cameron loves Shmoo and was like, "You got to watch it. You got to watch it." So I watched some of that. I don't even think I'd ever actually watched an episode of Josie and the Pussycats. Just seen them on the new Scooby-Doo movies, and that's kind of it. I really think that while some are closer than others to being spin-offs or clones of Scooby, I'm honestly going to kind of take the stance and say that none of them are true spin-offs, but that they're all inspired by Scooby. So I don't know that any of them would have come to fruition necessarily without Scooby, but I don't really think that any of them are a true carbon copy. Same formula. I mean, they're similar formulas, but they're also not when you start looking at them. So Clue Club is very similar to Scooby, but I kind of think that the dogs are like a hindrance to the show. And that's where it really, really differs from Scooby, because Scooby's not a mascot. I think that that is kind of the formula that people look at, like, okay, it's a group of teenagers, it's a dog, a mascot, something extra. There's a mystery, there's a bad guy. They solve the mystery and the bad guy goes to jail. That's fine, but none of these to me scream Scooby-Doo, and none of them captured Scooby's like essence to me. And I was very surprised with that. I think to be a true spin-off of something, look at like regular procedural shows. NCIS was a spin-off of JAG. Joni and Chachi was a spin-off of Happy Days. So either you have a character that moves from one show to the new show. That can be a spin-off, even if you change the format or the story. Or I think that the spin-off has to take place in the same universe. And maybe you don't need to have a crossover, but it certainly helps, and you usually see that. All the, like, there's 3 series of FBI that air right now. They have all crossed over. So those are spin-offs. To me, none of these are a spin-off of Scooby-Doo. So they're okay. I kind of was hoping that I would like them a little bit more than I did, and I didn't. So that was like a little bit disappointing, but again, it just kind of goes back to what we always say, which is Scooby is his own thing. He really is. And it doesn't matter how close you come to adopting the same format. It's just not Scooby. Because I think in the beginning, I don't think that Scooby is really based on anything, though I will point out that Scooby and the Hardy Boys Filmation cartoon series, which aired both in 1969, like a week apart, and the Hardy Boys actually was first. So neither of them inspired the other, but it is interesting that I would say that the closest series to being a spin-off or a clone of Scooby would be that Hardy Boys series. I think that that is the closest in style to what Scooby is. But Scooby was just kind of effortless. I don't think that they had any expectations. They didn't set any boundaries for themselves. I don't know that I'm sure they had ideas of what they wanted to do, but they just kind of did it. They went in and they did it, and they let it be whatever it was going to be. Literally everything that comes after that, in some way, shape, or form, you are comparing it to that original and trying to duplicate what the original was. So by definition alone, you can't replicate it, because you are confined by boundaries. You're confined by a formula, or what you perceive as the formula. And to me, that's what it didn't kill the other ones. Every one of them made a season or two. I think that people still like some of them, but none of them are Scooby. And I think that's why, because Scooby was the original and they just let him be what he was going to be. And everything else it was trying to be him. So all of the other shows are like a caricature of Scooby. So yeah, I don't know. What did you guys think about, are they the same series? Really? Does anybody disagree with that?
I don't think they're the same, but the Funky Phantom, I just happened to watch the episode called Don't Fool with a Phantom.
Oh.
And you could literally take the Funky Phantom characters out and put in Scooby-Doo characters, and it would be a Scooby-Doo episode. The whole atmosphere, the art style, the backgrounds, the way that the characters interacted, it just felt like it could be a Scooby-Doo episode if you put the Scooby Gang in it.
Yeah.
Scott, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, no, I think, to be honest, to get down to the actual spin-offs, Scooby was like Wendy was saying, Scooby was basically lightning in a bottle. And they were figuring it out as they went along. And whatever parameters they have, by the time they decided to not spin off other shows, but make shows like that, because Scooby was popular to a point. And even the shows that were the true spin-offs of Scooby, like Scooby-Doo movies, Scooby and Scrappy, Laugh Olympics, the Scooby-Doo show, even those did not capture what Where Are You did. That was, that was pretty much the end all be all. That's what it always should have been. Even on Scooby-Doo show, they got pretty close, but it took them a little time to get that way. Even the later incarnations of Scooby and Scrappy really just went completely left field. The other shows, I agree with Wendy. They're not really, they're definitely inspired by Scooby, but again, it was like, what can we do to make a show as successful as that? Now, technically, Scooby only went 2 seasons, and the second season was only half of an order. And then they went to Scooby-Doo movies, and they had a whole bunch of different writers, and that went completely off base because they were more concerned about highlighting the celebrity as they were, and then Scooby just happened to be in it. That's kind of what it came down to. Then they, like I said, they lost sight. Then they put Scooby back after Scooby-Doo movies ran 2 seasons. Then they put Scooby back on, and it ran from 74 all the way to 76. And then it went to ABC. And then that's when, like Ruby and Spears were in charge of ABC children's programming at that point, underneath Fred Silverman and people like that. And they were, very responsible they didn't work for Hanna-Barbera Hanna-Barbera at that time. They worked for the network. And so they oversaw all that stuff. They oversaw Sid and Marty Krofft shows. They created Wonder Bug and Bigfoot and Wild Boy and all that stuff. And they were very concerned about Scooby because you can tell about the episode 5, they could tell that it wasn't their Scooby. So that you could tell that it starts to take that turn back into what it was. You know, it was so much more of the really high-end gags where Scooby and Shaggy would go off and do something goofy. Like I always go back to the one where in mask was it the one with about the mask mix up, where
Mystery mask mix up.
Yeah, mystery mask mix up. That's hard to say. You know, Shaggy jumps on Scooby and revs him up like a motorcycle and takes off. I mean, they wanted to put that more of those type of gags in. So again, that wasn't even second season wasn't even a true version of Scooby, and they put the songs in there. Now, my big complaint about this stuff is there are shows that are always compared to being in that same genre as Scooby, like Josie and the Pussycats. Josie and the Pussycats, Speed Buggy, and Jabberjaw are always compared to Scooby, and they're not. It's not the same show. Those shows were just because they had teenagers and a gimmick, and I'll say gimmick because that's what it is, they always went up against a supervillain. It was never like solving a mystery and unmasking somebody. It was stopping a supervillain from taking over the world. Even though Jabberjaw took place in the future underwater, supposedly. Speed Buggy was always like in a race, and then there was somebody that was using like, just same as Josie and the Pussycats, using plants to take over the world, or we're going to control the weather, or whatever. And they would just stumble across that. Now, granted, the only similarity is that the gang most of the time stumbled across the mystery, and where are you? But sometimes they'd be at the malt shop and reading the paper going, oh, wow, or Scooby's inherited something, or, there was always something that dragged them into that mystery. Josie and the Pussycats was the same way. They stumbled across it. Now, the way Josie got to be made, and this is why I say it's a completely different show. All these shows really, because of the gimmick, are, like you were saying, Wendy, are their own entity. They're not, I don't think so much as a Scooby clone, but they have similarities because it's, 4 or 5 teenagers, 3 or 4 teenagers and something, and in fact, legend has it that Ruby Spears, after they left, they had their own studio when they did Fang Face, and they had this disc up on the wall with an arrow, and he would have like a group of teenagers, however many teenagers, a something, like a jackrabbit or a ghost cat or something, and then what the mystery was, and they would spin it. And whatever the arrow hit, that's what they would make a show out of. They would try to pitch that, so I don't know if that's really true or not, but, Jerry Eisenberg swears that it is. But the thing is, like I was going to say, with Josie and the Pussycats, I think initially, the way I understand it from Ewo and from Jerry, having worked with them, Fred Silverman came in, I guess Filmation, because they were so like bogged down in the Archie world, and they were doing Sabrina and Grooby Ghoulies and the Archie Funhouse and all that stuff that year, that they were kind of tapped out. And I think they may have had a couple other shows that season too, somewhere else. I don't know. Well, no, maybe it was just CBS. Anyway, they were really successful, and Fred Silverman did not want to screw that up because that was his, that was the big thing at the point. Archie's, like #1 song in 1969 and all other stuff. So from what Jerry and Ewo said, and I'm, kind of quoting what they told me, is Fred Silverman walks in with the Josie and the Pussycat comic book, throws it on the table and says, "I'll see you in September," and walks out. And they were like, what do we do with this? He didn't want to do Scooby verbatim. He wanted to do something else. So Ruby and Spears came up with that premise of, okay, it's a supervillain. They are a rock band, which was the original premise for Scooby. They were going to be a rock band. So, Josie Pussycats already was, because in the comic book they were. And so that was kind of like, that's how that got to be. And that kind of formula and that's that's a whole different formula, where it was like, supervillain, taking over the world, and they thwart that. So that was the thing with that. But and again, like I said, Speed Buggy was the same way, and so was Jabberjaw. The other shows, some of them are kind of teetering on that formula. and as the more of you watch them, I mean, Funky Phantom absolutely is probably is really close to Scooby, not as close as some of the other ones. Going down the list, Chan Clan usually would just, again, they got into a formula of this too, where it was somebody like smuggling something or a jewel heist or something like that, but not to the point where they would like dress up like a ghost or a monster or something and you have to unmask it. So Chan Clan didn't have a lot of that. The gimmick
They
on
did
Chan
use, in the Chan Clan, they did use the music from
Oh, yeah.
the Scooby-Doo theme song.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to pay for more music. That's what a lot of that was. And it worked. I mean, if you look at like, you know, for example, if you look at all the Johnny Quest music and all that music was used in all the superhero shows in 1967, you know, from Hercules to Space Ghost all the way down, you know. But and I think for Josie, because I have the music cues on that, they only wrote maybe 3 music cues and the rest were from Scooby.
Yeah.
So that's maybe why people think, oh, that's Scooby-Doo, you know.
Well, Chan Clan was the actual Scooby theme song, which I thought was odd.
Yeah, well, they did that sometimes. Just
Yeah.
like in Scooby-Doo, they would use all the Huck Finn music, and they had Huck Finn theme song in there sometimes. I'm like, what is that? You know, how did?
That's right. Yeah.
But again, they, you know, it was the same. It was a year after, so they're just like, well, let's just use this because we're not going to spend the money to, you know. But you know, if you go down the list, it's like Funky Phantom. The gimmick was the ghost, you know, and that was taking place at Scooby, and it had an ugly bulldog, and you had a cat that didn't look like a cat, and the bulldog really didn't look like a bulldog either, but you know. And then you let's see, Chan Clan. The gimmick was he had 10 kids, and they were all trying to solve the mystery. Let's see, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kids legitimately were secret agents that covered as a rock band, and it was usually a smuggling deal or somebody's trying to steal jewels or something to that effect. So that was the gimmick for that one. Goober and the Ghost Chasers. Okay. Goober and the Ghost Chasers was a precursor to 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. It had real ghosts in it, and the real ghosts would usually be the ones that would be kind of screwed over, and they'd be like, oh, we need help to, you know, get rid of the people who are pretending to be us and making us look bad. So they had that. You had a dog that disappeared. That was the gimmick, I guess. Well, the gimmick was the ghosts, the dog that disappeared, and the Partridge Kids. Because Hanna-Barbera had the rights to do something with the Partridge Kids, and they were determined to make that into something. And that's what that came out of. And they also had a couple other guest stars. So that kind of brought the Scooby-Doo movie vibe. So there was another gimmick that they did that. Partridge Kids, I think, were almost in every episode except maybe 3 or 4. I don't remember. I have to go back and look. Speed Buggy gimmick was a car, and it was Josie and the Pussycats with a car in a race. That's all it was. Inch High Private Eye. Okay, the only reason I included that, the gimmick was Inch High. He's the star of the show. It had 2 teenagers and a St. Bernard, and they had a cool car that, oh, the coolest thing about Chan Clan was the van that they could change into anything. They would just push a button and it would change into a fire truck or a street sweeper or whatever. I thought that was cool. So there was another gimmick. And Inch High was not really a Scooby. It was more like somebody stealing jewels or somebody smuggling something or, you know, some underhanded toy maker that was going to, like, you know, I don't know, flood the market with something that's, you know, that wasn't really a big deal. Clue Club. Now, Clue Club is a whole different animal. When Scooby-Doo left in '76 to go to ABC, CBS actually premiered Clue Club 2 or 3 weeks prior to Scooby. They just stopped Scooby, it was gone. And Clue Club, I think CBS went to them, because Silverman again was at ABC. So CBS said, we want a show that's going to take the place of Scooby. And so that's probably as close as you can get to Scooby. That show is probably as close as you're going to get. Because it kind of has the same thing, because you have, you know, Dottie is Velma, and she stays in the garage and does all the research. And then you've got, you know, you got Pepper and Dee Dee, and they're, you know, they're kind of the Scooby and Shaggy of the group. And then was it Larry? I think he's the main kid, and he's kind of the leader, like Fred. But then you have the dogs that go off on their own, and they have their own dialogue about what the mystery is going to be. So, and as far as unmasking somebody and the heists and whatever, the schemes being exactly the same, that's what it was. Where are we? Okay, then Scooby-Doo show, though, we know all about that. Jabberjaw, again, the gimmick was a shark, took place underwater. took place in the future, and they were a rock band. So, you know, there's a gimmick. Dino-Mutt, we put Dino-Mutt on the list, I think I did anyway, because it was a spinoff of Scooby, or it was combined with Scooby. So Scooby made cameos in that. So it exists in that same world, although all that was just a spoof of Batman and Robin. You know, that's all it was. And it had the same announcer from the Batman show, from the original Batman show. So, you know, and I think that's why, and you know, probably more of the better known shows that were done at that point. Captain Caveman, the gimmick was Captain Caveman. And, you know, again, 3 teenagers. Buford Files. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, that's not one of my favorites. But
The
again,
Buford
it's like,
Files gave me more of a Looney Tunes vibe.
yeah,
Hmm.
kind of, sort of. But it's so funny. It's like, I think Phil Mendez was the one that designed Buford. They hired him for a bit to do a bunch of development for him. And I think he was big on, because Buford, if you look at any Hanna-Barbera show, Buford, and there was a show they did later called Foofer. And Buford and Foofer are basically the same design. You know? But yeah, Buford Files was just, and then Joe Barbera was really hung up on the Smokey and the Bandit thing, so that's why they put the sheriff and the, you know, the flunky in there with him. So just like the Jackie Gleason character in Smokey and the Bandit. So he was hung up on that for a while. Fangface is pretty close to Scooby. You know, sometimes they'd have a kind of a weird supervillain thing. I think there was one episode where they had like this Hulk-like creature, but I think it turned out just to be a scientist in a costume or something. I don't remember. Sometimes they would go back and forth. There was one time they had like a big dinosaur, and I'm like, well, that was like Three Stooges episode of, you know, of the new Scooby-Doo movies. But Fangface was the gimmick, you know, but it worked more. They worked more as a unit too, just like Scooby did. And that's the thing that you touched on, Wendy, is that, you know, there wasn't really a gimmick with Scooby, even though he was a talking dog. He didn't really talk that much in the first couple of seasons.
No.
You know, but the gimmick was the gang, you know, solving the mystery. So, and then what we got? Shmoo? Yeah, new Shmoo. You know, they had the rights to do the Shmoo from Little Abner comic strip, and 3 teenagers and a thing, you know, that could change shape and be really cute and talk like Frank Welker. So that way, and his cute voice. So yeah, going down the list, I mean, that's, again, each show had its gimmick, and they did get trapped in that formula. They created a formula for themselves, and they thought that that was, again, the lightning in the bottle that they achieved in Scooby. But it wasn't, because Scooby, like, you know, like we said, there wasn't a standout character in Scooby. They worked as a unit, and, you know, Shaggy and Scooby, being the smart ones, that always ran because they didn't want to get killed by whatever that was, you know, and the other 3 were like, you know, but the other 3 were really brave, you know, for the most part, and they all worked together as a team. So, yeah.
Joel, what are your thoughts on the shows?
I have been meaning to watch these for decades. I first became aware of them just reading books. It was pre-internet, because I considered myself a Scooby fan first, but then like a Hanna-Barbera fan second. And then I think some of them came in on DVD, and I bought them, never watched them. I was just busy at the time. So I'm glad finally sat down, watched like the first episode or every episode. And like, I thought I'd never watch these until I retired, really. Like, then I'd finally have time to go through all these. And I didn't dislike any of them, really. Like, but I did have problems with all of them too at the same time. Like, I think I'd rather be watching Scooby in a lot of the cases. But yeah, like, these aren't really similar to Scooby-Doo, like Scott and Wendy said, like gimmick, or, you know, not a direct spin-off. I saw some awesome stuff in every episode. Then I also, like, a lot of the dogs in all these episodes I didn't like at all. They didn't have Scooby's charisma. And then the teenagers too. I like Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, but I like Captain Caveman a lot as a kid. I did watch the show as a kid. I think I saw later episodes where they're on like some Flintstones spinoff, and Shmoo was there too.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, good. But I think I'd rather see the Teen Angels with Captain Caveman now. Like I just kind of found him,
Yeah.
he annoyed me now. Even though as a kid I'd always imitate him. But I just like the Teen
Could
Angels.
you do that for us now? Because I'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was pre-puberty. I don't think I could do it now.
Oh,
This is like 6, 7 years old. I'd have to not bathe for like a week or two too. Pull it off.
you're looking pretty shaggy at the time, probably too. So
Yeah. Had hair back then, yeah.
yeah.
Buford Files I kind of liked. I didn't finish it though, but I was like, yeah, I can see what this is. It's a Smokey and the Bandit ripoff, kind of. But what I liked about it is like Buford was having a dream. I thought Buford was like the ugliest dog though. I like Foofer a lot better than Buford. I guess they cleaned up Foofer a bit because Buford was just, but I was also watching low quality, so maybe he looks better if I have like a higher definition of this. But there's a little raccoon that wanders in because Buford's having a dream, and it's like a Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, this is awesome.
He's picking a fight with him and everything.
Yeah,
Fouling him up. Yeah.
I love that little Japanese raccoon.
He had a little headband on, like Karate Kid.
Yeah, it was great. So I think if it was just him and Buford, I think I'd love this show.
Yeah.
And Goober and the Ghost Chasers, I wanted to like the dog, but the disappearing act was just too weird for me. But I wanted to like the dog. He had like a hat, and I wear a hat. I'm like, this could be my dog, but Jabberjaw, like the Three Stooges voice, just always bothered me. But I'm a big fan of Jaws, so I wanted to really like Jabberjaw. But yeah, the voice just bothered me. Dynomutt, like I have the DVD where they have the Scooby-Doo show combined with Dynomutt. And I watched the Scooby-Doo episodes with Dynomutt, and that's all I watched. Like Scott said, it's a Batman and Robin kind of parody, and it didn't really agree with me. Josie and the Pussycats, I liked. It is like always seemed like a 007 James Bond kind of.
Yeah.
Like all these kind of seem like what's popular in movies or popular culture, and let's kind of like incorporate that into the show. Josie was always like that to me, and when they threw in the music from Scooby-Doo, it really distracted from me too. I'm like, I don't want to hear Scooby-Doo music in my Josie and the Pussycats. But the music, the songs, I love. Like I have a CD with all the original songs that they did from Josie and the Pussycats, and I love all those songs where they perform. And I like that about Butch Cassidy. I like the songs in that, but I didn't like the spy stuff too much in that. I wanted to like it a little bit more. The one with Butch Cassidy was out with the Partridge Family. Which one was it?
That was
Partridge Kids.
Goober.
I was Goober. Okay, I like the inclusion of the Partridge Kids. Funky because I always like the Partridge Family. Funky Phantom, the Snagglepuss or Snaggletooth. Is it Snagglepuss?
Uh-huh.
The voice that bothered me because I'm like, I want Snagglepuss here.
Yeah.
And you're giving me some other character with Snagglepuss's voice. And Inch High Private Eyes, it's too, I don't know, it's too serious for me. I didn't finish that episode. I probably could like it though if I gave it time. Fang Face, I like the spookiness of it. Amazing Chan, I like that one. It was cute. And the New Shmoo is probably one of my favorites, just because it was they had like a Dracula episode. They had a lot of horror episodes, and they had wrote for comic books or something. That comic book kind of thing going on. I like that. I think I covered them all. Yeah. I'd like to check them all out though, like the whole series.
Like you, Joel, I had issues with a lot of the characters from these. To me, and I've never really thought about this, but I was thinking about it today. If Scooby-Doo was actually Scooby-Dumb, right? And every episode included Scooby-Dumb, I think it would irritate me. Because I like Scooby-Dumb, but I like him in small doses. So I wouldn't want him to be a part of the series like all the time. But yeah, it would be as irritating as a lot of these other characters. I never really thought about it that way. But
Nikki, is that what irritates you about having Scrappy on every episode of Scooby and Scrappy? Because absolutely made that what? I'm, just-
As I
Riling
said,
her up this early?
I'm sorry. I'm just reinforcing that her point that she was making, that she didn't like too much of something in one thing.
well, Scrappy's just a bully. And a
No,
pest.
Scrappy's not a-
Apparently, Wendy has pointed out to me that he's a pest. So thank you, Wendy. I
He's
appreciate
not
it.
a pest. He's the cutest little guy. No, you know what? I want to bring up a point about the Snagglepuss and Funky Phantom, Mudsy voice. If you talk to Dawes Butler, those were two different voices, because he would always preface everything by saying that. No, it's like, well, it's a dialect and it's just a little bit more of an inflection. The only difference was like Funky Phantom would say like heavens to Betsy Ross instead of heavens to Murgatroyd. It was that type of thing. So that was the big difference. Now, if you want to get technical, because Joe Barbera was so like enamored with that voice. I don't know if you noticed or not, but watching Goober is Paul Winchell doing Snagglepuss. And it's like, okay, I mean, I know the Three Stooges voice irritates you. That's my favorite part of Jabberjaw, that he talks like that. So I don't know that I didn't have a problem with it. Now, every time I would see Frank Welker, I'd have him do like, can you do Jabberjaw for me? Because he'd be like, look at me like, why? So he'd rather do Shmoo. I'm like, no, I want to hear Jabberjaw. But in fact, when I did a tribute to Joe Barbera for his birthday, and we had all the characters at the end. We had a curtain open up, and all the characters are cheering. And I was Jabberjaw's like right in the foreground. I said, Frank, you got to do Jabberjaw for me. Just like, So he didn't really enjoy doing that voice, I guess. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but it didn't seem like he was really keen on it, but yeah.
That was my issue with Alexander and Josie and the Pussycats. He sounded and almost looked exactly like Shaggy, and I felt like it should have been Shaggy.
Right.
Well, that was the thing too, when they were on the Scooby-Doo movies in the second season. That was the first episode of the second season. And I'm like, even watching that as a kid, I'm like, how are they going to get away with this? Because that voice is exactly the same, but it isn't. I mean, Shaggy has got a higher register, and Alexander is closer to Shaggy's, or to Casey's speaking voice in a way. So yeah, so they kind of covered it up a little bit more, but they didn't have them in a lot of scenes together, I noticed.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. I think other people kind of confuse that Josie is in the Scooby realm, because they were on the Scooby-Doo movies, and it wasn't a supervillain. It was a traditional Scooby mystery, at the time too. So that might have been a lot of it too, that people get kind of confused.
Yeah. Nikki, to go back to what you said about Scooby-Dum and what it would have been like if he had been the lead instead of Scooby, that reminds me of something that I thought of today when I was watching Inch High Private Eye, which was all of the series that came after Scooby, original Scooby. It's like they were using characters or tropes of annoying or like bumbling characters. Like Inch High Private Eye, he's kind of a bumbler. Or just in general, like, I'm sorry to say it, but like idiocy. Because some of the characters in these shows, I'm like, are you an idiot? Like, because you sound kind of like an idiot. You're acting a bit like an idiot. And it's almost like they were using that as sort of like a forced humor in all of those series. And it just, for me, was like not endearing or entertaining at all. And yet they kept doing it over and over and over again. And I think why Scooby works so well is that they never did that. They played everything straight. The humor in Scooby was all, I still say that it was all incidental. I'm sure that they wrote it to be funny, but they weren't trying to make the characters funny.
Yeah.
To me, they were playing a serious drama that the characters inserted a little bit of humor into to lighten the mood. Everything, all those series that came after, like the humor is very forced, which I think you also see in modern Scooby-Doo. They have never gone back to that original, the way that they did Scooby's humor, and they kind of have just followed in the footsteps of all of these clones that came after, where it's like, oh no, we need you to know that we're trying to be funny right now. But they weren't really great at being funny, because like the bumbling sidekick kind of shtick it's a shtick. And I don't, even as a little kid, I wouldn't have really liked that much. I mean, I do love Inspector Gadget, and he's kind of like a bumbling inch eye private eye type. But even he could get, I mean, I think that's why they had to make Penny, so like Penny and Brain, they're kind of the stars of the show. Like, it's called Inspector Gadget, but I almost feel like he's an incidental character on his own show. And that's why we can get away with it, though. But in all of these other like things that came after Scooby, they just like, everything is lacking in personality and character. And I would challenge anyone who has like been on the panel before or watched the panel videos who have said that the Scooby characters in Where Are You, that they're like drab and boring and they don't have any personality. Excuse me, watch any of these shows and come back and tell me that the Scooby Gang don't have a personality, because you will find out right away they have more personality than like all of the characters in all of these other shows put together. These other ones are so cookie cutter, generic, but in the boring sense. All of the Scooby characters, they have their own personality. Sure, they're not over the top personalities, but regular people aren't either. Having somebody that's like super flamboyant or just like boisterous or whatever, are there people like that? Absolutely. But that's not the majority of people. The majority of people, we just wander around and we look normal, we sound normal, we like normal things, and we're just each a little bit different. And that's, I think Scooby's very relatable. All of those characters are relatable. All of these other ones, it's like the characters are playing a role. The Scooby Gang are just being themselves. And that's a big difference between all of those series and Scooby, I think.
You bring up a good point on that too, because when Scooby was first developed, Fred Silverman, and Ruby and Spears, their main goal was to emulate Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and the Bowery Boys. And all those movies, those monsters were treated straight, and you had the funny people, dancing around them basically.
Yeah. So
that's the way Scooby was treated. And these other shows, no, they didn't do that. And like you said, they had the, well, I mean, the only thing that Scooby and Shaggy did was they would bumble into accidentally capturing the monster, but there was still a very major threat that they were going to be, that they were going to be harmed in some way because somebody was trying to get away with something and they had meddling kids and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But they kept the monsters very straight. I mean, some of those, still kids are traumatized by, Space Kook and some of those monsters, Creeper and all those other things. I mean, they were done very straight, and that was the main goal of the show. As far as the other shows go, they use that, like they did the inadvertent capture of some of the characters, but it was more like there wasn't that much of a threat in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I think so that has a lot to do with it too.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that was the other thing too about, I love it. And like Joel mentioned a while ago, it's like the songs in like Josie. I mean, like I said, Silverman was all about that. That was his thing. And I've said this before, it's like the Beatles were just beating everything in the ratings. And he figured out, well, because the kids like the Beatles because of the music. It's like, well, yeah, you like the Beatles music, but it's the Beatles. That's what the thing was. That was what the ratings getter was. But then when he stumbled across, the Archies, and then putting music into that, then that took off. And then he's like, well, because he even tried to do a show based on the Beatles called the Beagles. That didn't go anywhere in 1967. It was the same people who did Underdog, and it just didn't catch on. But then when he stumbled across the Archies and put the music in that, and had Ron Dante and Don Kirshner do the music, and that was the thing about all that music stuff, that it was always done by really pretty high quality people. I mean, people that were starting out that wrote for a bunch of other groups, that were, and then he put music. He had music in Archie, which led to music in Josie, which led to music in Scooby the same season. And then that season 2, he had music in the Globetrotters. Whenever they play the basketball game, they had all these soul performers back. Even Barry White wrote songs for the Globetrotters back in the day, so it's just stuff like that. So he was so hung up on that. He thought that was the thing that the kids wanted to see, and that was the key to it. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Like I said, it's that, when you go back to like, the whole lightning on a bottle thing, it's like, Scooby was the exception to all this stuff. And they had that formula they got locked into. And they thought that's the only, there's no escape from that. You can't, there's no, other than either you're making it a legitimate criminal, or you're making it a criminal that's pretending to be something else that he's not, to scare people away. And that was it after, but that was, Scooby was just more like, it was a criminal that was trying to scare people away from something, like trying to create something that, but then again, you have an episode like, the Funland episode where there was no threat, really, it was just kind of a mistaken, like, oh, this thing went out of control, we can't stop it. So again, going back to your original point, Wendy, that it's like they were trying to figure it out and there's no parameters, and then they finally kind of got locked into it. I think by the time they hit the Scooby-Doo show, they were really locked into it, and it was like, okay, I mean, it's still kind of the same show, but yeah, the premise is kind of a little bit lost, or a little more formula locked than it should have been, I think,
Yeah. Well, they lost their freedom of what they were doing in season 1 of Where Are You? Because like you say, even episodes like Foul Play and Funland, there wasn't a mold yet, but it sort of broke the mold that then became Scooby, because there was no bad guy, really.
No,
but I think
wasn't.
That's what kept it fresh, was that you could have an episode where they're in the museum and it's a guy in a suit of armor, or you can be in some, like, who has an amusement park out on an island,
right,
with a robot running it? I mean, it's so random. Or like an alien, a spaceship at an air.
The one where Scooby inherits the, he's there for the will reading, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Or the dog napper one was the same thing,
Yeah. So like there was a lot of diversity in what they could do when the formula was just the friends going out and doing something.
Right.
To me, that's the Scooby. If Scooby has a formula, that's the formula. A bunch of friends go out and have an adventure.
Right.
And then you just make that into whatever.
Whether they stumble across it or they intentionally go.
Yeah.
And they went back and forth on it. So sometimes it was like, oh, let's go to a rock concert. Wait a minute, there's a zombie in the road. What?
Yeah.
It's like, that's, we ran out of gas, or the radiator's overheating. Oh, look at that really scary place over there. Let's go over there and see if there's anything. And then, then you're looking for, Civil War bonds.
Right.
It makes no sense, Well, it does make sense. It makes perfect sense. But again, it's a threat. And they're all scared. Well, Shaggy and Scooby are scared to death. The other three are kind of holding it together, because they don't believe that it's anything major anyway. But they got to get to the bottom of it because it's wrong.
Right.
But showing you wrong from right.
Yeah.
Those life lessons.
The golden rule, right? Exactly.
So why do you think so many shows were modeled after the basic concept of Scooby-Doo? Joel?
Yeah, I think it was a success. And if you look at anything in popular culture, if you have success, it always gets imitated. Like Star Wars, when that came out, you had a bunch of sci-fi spin-offs. Halloween, you had like the slasher era after that, Friday the 13th, and lots of cheapo slashers. And then recently, like superhero movies, right? Iron Man, huge. The last 15 years has been nothing but superhero movies. So I think that was basically, like, I don't think this is a unique situation to Scooby-Doo. I think it's just they saw money, maybe a printing press. They got to make some money to keep paying people, keep everyone employed. And it seemed kind of probably like a sure thing, and probably easy to sell to advertisers too, or to, if advertisers were paying attention, they'd be like, this is kind of like Scooby-Doo, but with spies, or with Josie and the Pussycats. I don't know. I wasn't even born then, but I just imagine it was just an easy sell.
Yeah. Wendy, why do you think?
Yeah, that it very much reminds me of today, where they have a good series and they're like, cool, let's make 5 more of them. So NCIS turned into NCIS Los Angeles, turned into NCIS New Orleans. FBI turned into FBI Most Wanted, turned into FBI International. And they're all running concurrently, though. They're not waiting for one to end so that they can start a new one. They're all running at the same time. And, you know, like Joel said, it's popular. We're making money. Let's do more. Look at how Funko, how they like, let's even take it to a different sector of entertainment, into like sales and marketing. When somebody's buying your product, get it out there as much as you can. Get it out there, get it out there. And then you get other companies who see that, and then they start making something similar. And next thing you know, the market is glutted, though. And so what you end up with is all these series, and they're just okay. They're not amazing like the original one was. The first one's the best one, but they got kind of like, you know, everybody's greedy to a sense, but if it's popular, let's make more of it, instead of maybe you could actually, if you did like a long-term plan, maybe wait until the show is over and then do your spin-off, because at some point everyone's kind of had enough of it. The market is saturated and everyone suddenly loses interest. I mean, you can go back to the 60s and you can see it with like monster stuff. It was all the rage, and they pushed it and they pushed it, and it was amazing. And then all of a sudden everyone was like, yep, we're done. It's like having your favorite food every single day for a month. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, you know what? I don't want this anymore. And you might not go back to it ever. You might not go back to it for a couple of years. So yeah, I don't know that they necessarily did themselves any favors by pushing so much of it at one time. Because like, guys, this is only in a 10-year period. This is only a decade's worth of television. And look at how many of them there are. And again, what potentially could have happened if all of them had just been spaced out more. I think that they also, by putting them so close together and pushing it so hard from the word go, is also kind of what made the ideas a little stale. Because like you run out of ideas, and when you're doing all of these shows, some of them simultaneously, you're going to get burnt out, and you're going to start putting out, I mean, I don't even like saying that anything Hanna-Barbera did was mediocre, because the worst Hanna-Barbera show is still 1,000 times better than the majority of what gets written and put out today, in my opinion. So I don't even want to say that, but I think that the writing could have been punched up a little bit in all of these series if they'd have just been like, yeah, let's not flood the market. That's what we want to do because it's popular right now. But if they'd have like just taken a breath and let everyone else breathe, and here we have this right now, enjoy it. When it starts waning, then we'll tweak it. It's Scooby, but it's not Scooby. But when it's all like happening at one time, yeah, you end up with a bunch of mediocre shows and one original that's amazing. And there you go. Like, what do you kind of, I was going to make it was going to come out crude. Let's not make that example. No, I'll think of something else to say. That was not, yeah, no. Yeah, if you get it all over with at one time, you're probably actually in the long run going to make less money than you would have if you'd have spaced it out. So I think it was all about making the money, but I think they actually kind of like hurt themselves, and they should have just waited a little bit.
Scott, what are your thoughts on why they created so many shows?
Well, Hanna-Barbera, and and I don't buy into this too much, even though it's so blatant. Hanna-Barbera was famous for ripping itself off. Mm-hmm. And I will take probably the most obvious one is they had the Flintstones. It was really successful. So what do we do now? Let's do the Jetsons. It's the same show, but it's in two different time periods, and that's the gimmick. So, and I could name any number of anthropomorphic animal shows that they had two characters that went and did the same thing, and they'd always have the whale episode, the medieval episode, the cowboy episode. Just you want to talk about cookie cutter, like you said. That's all it was. Okay, why should the mystery shows be any different than that? That's exactly what it is. Something works. Not that you're fixing it. Let's just do more of it. Let's mass produce this sucker, because that's what they wanted. That's what the kids are into these days. You know, that's what they're gravitating towards. And Joe Barbera was all about pop culture. Whatever was big at the time. You look at a show like Wacky Races. Every one of those cars was like something of that era. It's like, let's have the army car. Let's have the 1920s gangster car. You know, let's have it was just, but again, everything was pop culture. So he was very tuned into that. Even when, well, okay, yeah, again, the superhero shows in 1966, and then from 66 to 67 until the teachers of America and all the mothers that went nuts saying, oh, they're too violent, get those things off of there. Every show was that. There was not one time period on Saturday morning on CBS, other than maybe Bugs Bunny, that was not a superhero show that followed suit with that. And same thing on NBC. They had those. They had a lot of those. And ABC went along with it too. So they were all like doing that for a while. Everything was a superhero show. So again, it's like, if something works, don't necessarily fix it. Just make more of it, because that's they can't get enough of it. It's just like you were talking about the monster thing. It's like, yeah, every show back in the day had some sort of monster or some sort of supernatural tone to it. And even if you want to get into, like, again, get even more specific about that, and I talked about the Flintstones, look at the last couple seasons of the Flintstones. It's like, okay, we have a hillbilly family. Where'd that come from? Beverly Hillbillies was really popular at the time. We had the Gruesomes. Where did that come from? Oh, Addams Family and the Monsters were really big at that time. We had Alien on there because Joe Barbera was like, well, let's just do that. Let's breathe new life into the show. You know, so again, you're breathing new life into the Scooby formula, but are you really? It's just, again, it's like, it's again the spinning the wheel on the Ruby Spears, this Ruby Spears studio. It's like, it's a chicken with four teenagers, you know, two girls and one guy, and I don't know, and the crook is, I don't know, an alien or I don't know, deep sea monster. So it was usually a deep sea monster. It was usually like a serpent or something. But you know, for the most part, they had more of those episodes than anything. Loch Ness monster type of thing. So yeah. And to be honest, I think too, even on the spinoffs, when you get into the actual Scooby-Doo spinoffs, like Laugh Olympics and all those things too, Scooby-Doo movies, I really think, because there was another show at the time called the Saturday Superstar Movie, same year as Scooby-Doo movies. And all those were our movies, but they were all potential pilots for a series. I really think, because having worked at Hanna-Barbera for as long as I did, and being in charge of presentation and going down to the vault and looking at all the old presentations, there were definitely shows based on those celebrities that were on Scooby, that were on point to be made. So they would use, I think they used new Scooby-Doo movies as a pilot launching pad too. Because I know I saw Sonny and Cher and Chastity show, you know, for that. I saw Jonathan Winters one. I saw a Phyllis Diller one. Maybe a Don Knotts and Tim Conway show, I think, at one point, that they were going to team them up into a show. I think the reason I think that this is a thing, not just because of that, but even in the Jonathan Winters episode, Jonathan Winters, you know, says something like, "Oh yeah, I think Jonathan Winters would make a great cartoon show." So he's like actually pleading for it, you know, it's like for the pitch of that. But again, I think that's just, you know, that's just the way things work. It's like, you know, they're just making more of it. They're just, you know, that's what it comes down to. So, and again, they did that in every, well, and then we got locked in when I got there. We got locked into the whole, here's a toy, make a series out of it. And that's all we were doing for a while, you know, from Pound Puppies to GoBots to Monchi cheese to Pac-Man to whatever, you know. So again, it's just that trend. And God love them, there's some generation of children that's their wheelhouse. That's the thing that they love, that they grew up on, and nothing, you can't sway them on how bad that show was just because it wasn't in your era, you know. So that's, you know, but that again, yeah, that's why there were so many versions of those mystery shows, because again, it was just Hanna-Barbera just doing more of the same, you know, because that's what worked. So, and that's what every network wanted, because it worked once. Let's do it 50 more times.
I just have to say, just the fact that you got to go and look in the Hanna-Barbera archives and see all of that stuff like in person.
I was actually in charge of it for a very long time.
Oh.
I just, you know, yeah.
That's like a dream. We would love to see all of that stuff.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. They had two different ones. They had the library downstairs. Well, we had what Joe called the cemetery, or the morgue sometimes, and that's where all the shows that never got made go. And we have these big presentation boards and pull those out. Oh, I wish that show would have made it, you know. And then there was another out in the warehouse. There was the scripts and the they had like presentation storyboards that they had out there, and I would refer to those and make copies. I have copies of a lot of stuff because there was just pieces of artwork that were just beautiful, you know. And that's the thing too. Like whenever we developed a show, that presentation art would just be so amazing, and then it would hurt kind of because you get this really amazing idea on just how figured out it was and how detailed it was, and all the little nuances and all the things that, you know, that just kind of fell by the wayside as the show went in development, because you'd have the networks involved and they would have their own opinion, and then people in the house would say, well, let's do this, let's do that. And then after you got that, then it would go into this like machine and just get spit out the other end. It's like, oh, that's not what we started out with. And it had the essence of it, but it just wasn't quite what we started out with as far as how much energy and care was put into that initial pitch, you know. So that was kind of the downside of it. You know?
Do you think that any of these shows could have the potential to have had the longevity that Scooby-Doo had? And why do you think they didn't last? Wendy?
I mean, I guess one could argue that technically they did last, because I mean, here we are talking about them and you can find them. But I mean, the short answer is honestly, no, not in the way that Scooby has endured. I kind of did answer this already, so I'll try not to completely repeat myself. But, you know, Scooby was the first, and it was brand new. And they were just trying to make something amazing. And they did. I kind of feel like all of the shows that came after Scooby, they were just checking boxes. And Scooby, by definition, is the definition of outside the box, because it was something brand new. They hadn't done anything like that before, and we haven't really seen anything exactly like that since. So Scooby's very outside of the box, but everything else is just checking boxes off because they want it to be Scooby, but they don't know how, because they think it's about the formula. I would argue that looking at all of these, what are we calling them? We're not calling them spin-offs, but clones or whatever. All of these things that were inspired by Scooby, much like in real life, the more you copy something, the more the quality of each copy degrades with your duplication. So you start out with your original and it's perfect, it's pristine. You put it in the photocopier, you make a copy. It's a little bit less quality. You take that copy you just made and you make a copy of that. Now there's even less toner, there's less ink, it's getting paler and paler. Now you take that copy of a copy and you make a copy of that. Holy mackerel, by the time you get 10 or 15 copies made, what are you left with? I mean, it's just a faint imprint of what the original was. It's not even, you can't even call it the same thing anymore. And so the way that it works like that in real life with paper and ink, I kind of see that happening in these shows, and even just under the actual Scooby umbrella. Forget about these like clone shows. Let's just look at Scooby as a franchise. You started with Where Are You? And then we made copies, new Scooby-Doo movies, Scooby-Doo show, all the way up, 13 Ghosts, Pup Scooby, Mystery Incorporated, Be Cool, all the way to Velma. Because, like, I'm sorry, Warner Brothers says that it's what it is, so it technically is Scooby. So I'm going to put it on this list here. Look at the downgrade from Where Are You to Velma. You can see it. It gets a little bit worse all the time. Be Cool is not the Scooby-Doo show. Velma's not Be Cool. It just got worse and worse and worse, even within the Scooby umbrella. So if that works even in the Scooby umbrella, then these other shows, I mean, they didn't really stand a chance, to be honest. If Scooby couldn't even make carbon copies of himself and capture the original spirit, there was no way that they were going to do that with a whole group of like other group of characters and ideas and storylines. It just wasn't going to happen. Everything is kind of just like a caricature of Scooby, and that's not that there's really anything wrong with it, but I kind of wish that they would just like admit defeat, because it's not defeat. If somebody creates something and it's amazing, let it just be something that's amazing. You don't have to try and top it. You don't have to try and make your own version of it. Go do what Scooby did in 1969. Make your own thing. Don't box yourself in with some kind of arbitrary formula or what you think is the formula, because you're not even, Scooby didn't have a formula, and then somehow Scooby became a formula. It doesn't even make any sense. Like it doesn't work. You can't do it like that. So I think it's time that they get out of the box, just like 1969 Scooby-Doo Where Are You did. It's out of the box. Go do your own thing. Stop with the copies. Put the copies away. Put the copier away. Get out your paper, get out your pen, do something new. Let it be its own thing, because those are the series that have longevity. Those are the series that people love. Those are the series that we'll still be talking about them in another 50 or 60 years. The carbon copies that came after them are just a hollow shell of what the original was, and you can't get around that. So stop trying. Just like Scooby's had his day, let him just be that amazing thing that he was, and stop trying to like dissect him. Let him just be this beautiful little anomaly and like leave it alone. That's okay. You don't have to have 100 hit shows. One hit wonder songs. We have coined that phrase, one hit wonder, for a reason. And that's okay. It's okay if you only have one song that's like super duper amazing and the rest are just like, they're fine, but they're nothing spectacular. Just be thankful that you had that one spectacular hit. Milk it for all it's worth. Be proud of it. That's great. Play it on the radio, play it in your car, and then just like leave it alone. Just enjoy it for what it is. So yeah, are the other ones, are we going to remember them? I would argue that we're only going to remember them in the context of, is this a Scooby clone or a spinoff? But it's still Scooby that we're remembering. We're not remembering them. So yeah, long story short, yeah, no. That no is the answer.
I do have to say that I liked Be Cool Scooby-Doo. And
Okay.
I don't care if you didn't like it. I liked it. It was hard for me to get past the animation, but the writing, I really like the writing. I think that they made the characters really funny, and the writing goes with the animation. Like, had they done a more like Where Are You type style, it would have been a really weird show. So yeah, but I liked Be Cool. I'm sorry, but not sorry. As for the longevity of these shows, I felt like each of these shows had an antagonist, and the Scooby Gang doesn't have that. They're friends, they get along, they work together really well. And all of these shows, it's like they're calling each other names, telling each other to shut up, saying something rude. So to me, I just feel like shows like that, especially kids' cartoons, aren't going to have that longevity because it's going to get really old to keep hearing the negativity. And you didn't have that negativity with Scooby-Doo. And I think that's why people can relate to the Scooby characters. You know, everybody says that there is a character on Scooby-Doo that they can relate to. But you don't ever hear people say like, oh yeah, I relate to the Funky Phantom. You know, I've never heard anyone say that. You don't see people cosplaying these shows, but they cosplay the Scooby characters, you know? Yeah. Yeah. So no longevity for these shows. They don't deserve it. No offense to the people that worked on them. They're great shows, and I'm glad that we got the 13 to 16 episodes. But yeah, not 50 years of it. So what are your thoughts on these shows having the longevity of Scooby-Doo?
I can't see it either. I wouldn't mind people returning to it now, taking a new take on it. That'd be cool. But well, just speaking for myself, I remember, so I was born in the 70s, but I'm started watching cartoons more in the 80s. But I had a hunger for Scooby-Doo. If Scooby-Doo, Where Are You was on, or Scooby-Doo Show was on, I'd watch that. But I was also caught up in the cartoon du jour or whatever, like Gummy Bears, Snorks, Pandemonium, I think I was one. And, you know, every September I was excited to see the new cartoons, and I'd kind of abandoned the old ones, which I guess these would be. Like, I wouldn't watch usually the second season of Gummy Bears. I'd watch what was new, which was probably He-Man or the Real Ghostbusters or something. Like, Scooby-Doo is an anomaly. Like, there isn't really anything from the 60s, from the 70s that carried over to the 80s, except from Scooby-Doo. There's probably exceptions, but Scooby-Doo is a big one that I can only think of that I was still watching in the 80s. I was watching a pup named Scooby-Doo in the 80s, right? Because Scooby-Doo. But yeah, I didn't think any of these were bad, but they knew Scooby-Doo was special, I think. And that's why they also marketed Scooby-Doo. They put out all the merchandise. There isn't much merchandise for a lot of these, I don't think. Josie and the Pussycats, you had like some of the albums, I think, that came on cereal boxes. And I was looking at Butch Cassidy, and it had some albums too that were released, some 2 singles. I'm sure there's some Captain Caveman toys and some other toys, but I haven't seen them because they're probably super rare and expensive. But look at all the Scooby-Doo merchandise behind everyone, right? It's the clear winner.
Could you imagine a room full of Captain Caveman?
No, thanks. No. It's fine.
Scott, what are your thoughts on the longevity of these shows?
Well, being the old guy in this group and being around when all these shows premiered and being right there with my Captain Crunch and my jammies, there were definitely breakout series those seasons that did better ratings wise and that were more known. I think some of them maybe still not, definitely not with the generation that exists now, but maybe people even a little bit younger than me, you know, that there's definitely people remember Josie and the Pussycats. That's a given. Let me go through the list here. Speed Buggy for sure, probably. Captain Caveman, Jabberjaw, Dino Mutt, you know. I would think that those would be the ones that were Fangface probably. Those were probably the ones that stood out. You know, again, are they well known now? No, but you know, they were well, again, the guys who did that Scoob movie thought that Captain Caveman was well known enough, and Dino Mutt and Blue Falcon were well known enough to put that in that, you know, to try to do a Hanna-Barbera universe, you know, that they had a big plan for, you know, but I don't think that that was received as well as they wanted it to be. But I think there definitely were standout characters from that people would, you know, again, a little bit younger than me would fondly remember because that was their generation things. And I was, you know, again, I was a teenager when a lot of those things came out, you know, I was like 16, 17 years old when Captain Caveman came out. Although, you know, I still loved it. thought it was amazing. But I think, you know, as far as the longevity go, no, you don't find that. I mean, again, you know, that's it's just more of a nostalgia thing. And some people like recognize the character, but they don't know what it was about, or they don't know what it's called, or whatever. But can I ask you guys a question about this? Out of all the Scooby shows, just Scooby-Doo spin-offs with Scooby, which do you think was the closest to Where Are You?
Scooby-Doo show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I feel like that's the wrong answer.
Not at all. I'm just curious because I mean, the thing I got from working on Pup Scooby is people would always come up to me and just like they were crazy over that because they thought, well, that's as close as you're ever going to get to the original show. And I'm like, no, it's kind of a parody, guys. What are you not seeing here? I mean, we're honoring what it is, but we're not doing it verbatim, and it wasn't meant to be done verbatim. But they were saying that's the closest thing that they've ever seen to get to. I mean, what the essence of Scooby, I guess. I was like, well, just because the mystery is the same, and you know, we're playing the monster. Well, we didn't even really play the monsters straight. They were goofy looking, but we did play them straight, I guess, as far as the threat aspect of it goes. But yeah, I was just wondering what you guys from where you all came from on that Scooby food chain.
And I wouldn't choose Pup because of the villains, like
Yeah, exactly.
Bigwig, the cheese
Yeah.
monster, like
Right.
Chickenstein, come on.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? Yeah. Oh, I agree completely. That's why that always surprised me when people would come back to me and say, well, I mean, they loved the show because it was, you know, it was it injected life into the franchise that it didn't have, or it was seriously needing at the time. I guess to me, that's probably what they admired more about it than anything, I would think. But yeah, I would go along with you. I don't, because I know the story behind Scooby-Doo show. It's hard for me. Well, I have other issues with that. I don't know if I will even want to go there. But knowing that Ruby and Spears weren't really happy with it until about the 5th episode, and they really started like cracking down and saying, give us our Scooby back, you know, because it was a big deal because ABC invested a lot to get that franchise to that network and to relaunch it as what it was, you know. Because Silverman was bound determined. It's like, well, I'm the one that came up with that basically, so we're gonna, you know, he's gonna bring it with him, and he convinced Michael Eisner, I think, at the time, to bring it over there, and it was a big purchase for them. I mean, I think it was kind of like the license had run out at CBS, and CBS really didn't realize it, and they were like, oh, you know, let's let's go back and get our puppy, you know. And but Ruby and Spears, you know, that's why they were hired at ABC, because they were overseeing all that stuff. And I know there was kind of a problem with HB wasn't delivering the type of Scooby show, because it didn't feel like their version of Scooby, so they really cracked down on it. So when you get around and if you really watch the show, and I have watched it again, I had issues with it when it first came out, and I just, you know, because Velma's voice, I've gone over this before, it was not Nicole doing Velma, and I had an issue with that. And I'm like, nope, I'm 16 years old. I don't want to watch this show. So I boycotted it. But I did go back and watch it. And I do see what happened. Like if you look at the first 3 or 4 episodes, just not quite there. And then when they hit the 5th episode, they start putting all the original music cues back in, and a lot of those gags and stuff. And then it started really kind of hitting what Where Are You was. And the monsters started getting a little more elaborate, you know, like the original show had too, you know. So yeah, but I liked it on that. I would agree with you that that's probably as close as it was going to get ever, you know, as far as I mean, to be honest, I thought this is not necessarily just for Wendy, okay? So make that very clear before you say it. I actually thought some of the first season of Scrappy was really, really close to what the Where Are You was, you know, especially that first episode with the scarab. I was like, yeah, that's pretty darn close to what Where Are You was, as far as the way the story was structured and everything. And you know, I thought they got really close on that too. But yeah.
Well, now I need to know if Joel and Nikki agree with you on this, because I don't.
No?
Those first few episodes of the Scooby-Doo show, to me, those are way more, they capture the atmosphere and the feeling of Where Are You? And then I feel like
they're definitely darker. They're definitely darker for sure.
Yeah, like they had that, because what's Where Are You has, and even I would even go so far as to say is only season 1, because as soon as they added in that musical chase, it like brought the tone down. It changed it.
It made it goofy. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It took away like that serious.
No, even though I love those romps completely, but I see what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree to a point, but yeah, it's just like, you know, I mean, yeah, the Scooby-Doo show, the first few episodes had that darkness that like Space Kook had, you know, and What a Night for Night had, you know, where these kids are like, they shouldn't be involved in this, you know, because something's bad's gonna happen to them. So yeah, that's definitely like, even that first episode where, is it a vampire on the skyscraper one? That's the first episode of where
he's a specter.
The specter? Okay. Why did I think he was a vampire? I don't know. But you hear that John Stephenson laugh, and he's like gargling at the end, because I'm surprised they even let that go, because that would have been a retake for sure. But you could tell he was really strained. That laugh where he's up on the balcony when they first see, or up on the girders, I guess, when they first see him.
Well, it's a good thing that they left it though, because then when he does the vampire, which is why you probably thought it was a vampire, it's the exact same laugh minus the gurgle when he does it in Vampire Bats and Scaredy Cats. So at least they're different.
That's what it is. Yeah. Well, he was in every episode of everything, so it's hard for me to distinguish that, because it just all runs together. But no, I agree with that. I mean, they were definitely darker, had a definite darker tone to them, like the original show did, you know, because I loved how, for the most part, in the original show, they would kind of like set it up like a real creepy thing, you know, before, even if the kids weren't in the scene at the beginning, you know, and it would be like, oh, you know, and then they'd come schlepping along, and then they get involved in it. But, you know, that's what happened in the first one of the Scooby-Doo show, you know, where they got hired to work as a crew on the, did they purposely do it, or was it like they just needed a job?
They needed money.
That's what okay. I you know, I've only watched them a few times, but because, you know, I've got an issue with it. But yeah. Poor Pat Stevens. I don't know what it was about him. It just wasn't there. But, you know, they did what they could do, and Nicole wasn't having it. So, you know, what are you gonna do? They replaced Betty on the Flintstones, and I was okay, but I was only 6. Like, it didn't bother me as much as it did when I was 16. You know, so yeah.
That's funny. So of these shows, did you like any of them, or like any concepts from them? Wendy?
I love Fangface, and I do like Shmoo. I think Clue Club is probably my favorite one. I am like low-key a little bit obsessed with Pepper, because she is probably the prettiest cartoon girl that I've ever seen, and I love her. And I mean, you want to talk about animation, like good animation. So many of these shows that we've talked about tonight, the animation quality and some of them is like, it's coming down a little bit. Some of their walk cycles are a little bit awkward and clunky, especially compared to original Scooby. Pepper's walk cycle in Clue Club, that is like a thing of beauty. They've even got her hair like swaying when she walks. I mean, it's gorgeous. Whoever animated that, like, props to you, because that is just like a standout, and she is just this beauty. I love her character. Not really into like the feuding kind of bratty attitude between like her and Dee Dee. I don't really like him as a character, but overall, I think that is probably my favorite of all of the series. And honestly, like I don't know if anybody else agrees, but Larry, if you just like rounded out his hair a little bit, could totally pass for cartoon version of Scott. I think Larry looks just like Scott in like a cartoon version. Anyway, that was just a side note. We can talk about that later. You can, because you're not going to win that argument. But something like
Wait a minute.
one.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, of course. It was a compliment. It wasn't something bad.
Okay.
My only criticism, my real criticism of Clue Club, even though it is my favorite one out of all of them, unlike Scooby, I don't, and now I haven't watched all of the episodes, I just watched a handful. I don't think that those mysteries are actually solvable by the viewer. I feel like with Scooby, whether it's Where Are You or especially the Scooby-Doo show, if you're paying attention enough, you can figure out who the villain is, but you really have to, like, it's not easy, but the way that they have crafted the story, they do put enough visible, noticeable clues in the episode that you should, if you're smart, you should be able to figure it out. You're not going to get to the end and they're going to do the reveal and you're like, wow, yeah, that's how. Clue Club, they get to the end and I'm like, what? How were we supposed to know that? How are we didn't see this happen. You didn't even allude to this happening. So I miss that because I feel like that is another thing that makes Scooby so great, is like, that's good writing. When you can write the mystery and you can write the clues and they all make sense, like you have thought about that. So to like have to like take that down to where it's like, okay, well, yeah, we wrote this story, but we're not going to take the time to explain during the story how the end makes sense. Like, that's a bit lazy for me. And I'm disappointed because I feel like that show had the most potential out of everything. And they kind of missed the boat on that. And they really, they could have done that because Scooby did that in every single episode, I think. So that's my only criticism of that one. Fangface, I'm going to limit that to season 1 because I can't stand Fangpuss. I don't like Fangpuss at all, and I don't like how that changed the dynamic. And I'm sorry, I love Frank, but I don't want to hear that voice ever in my life. I just don't. Fangface I can handle, Fangpuss I can't. So season 1 of Fangface is amazing. There is an episode with a werewolf. I mean, I know Fangface is a werewolf, but like a scary werewolf. Most beautiful rendering of like an animated cartoon or illustrated werewolf that I've ever seen. It is scary. It's perfection. Beautiful, beautiful job. The intros for all of these shows, though, that is the one thing I will say. Every single one of these shows that we have talked about, the intro sequence is beautifully done. Very, 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 very nice. Maybe to their detriment because you watch it and you're like, holy crap, this is going to be fantastic. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, okay, well, that was nice, I guess. But so it didn't it's kind of like when you buy a book and the cover's amazing. And then you realize that the artist actually didn't get to read the book before they drew the picture on the cover. And it has really nothing to do with it. And the book sucks, but the cover looks amazing. And then you're kind of disappointed. So there's a little bit of that. I think it's, which one is it? I made a note for it. Which one? There's one, like the text in the intro and the outro is just also perfection. Oh yeah. Funky Phantom. End credits. To take a look at like the font work in that, because font work is difficult. And they like took that way over the top. Which is also kind of strange because I feel like Funky Phantom is the one show that looks like it was done with like the cheaper animation that the new Scooby-Doo movies was done with. So to think that they had like the best credits is kind of strange, but I mean, good for them. At least they've got something going for them. But yeah, they all have their plus side. But yeah, I think Clue Club is definitely my favorite one. I will continue to watch that and I will watch the full series.
Joel, what are your thoughts on what shows you liked or concepts from the shows that you liked?
Yeah, I think Clue Club stood out the most for me. I started watching it 3 years ago. Never finished it, but I always meant to get back to it. Only watched the first episode. I tried buying it on DVD. I prefer to watch it on DVD versus streaming. And there's a version I found, but it was region locked, so I didn't buy it. So, and then I've been holding out because Warner Archives has been releasing everything on Blu-ray, and I'm hoping some of these get released on Blu-ray. Like they released Josie and the Pussycats seasons 1 and 2 on Blu-ray, and they look amazing. But that wasn't my favorite. It'd be Clue Club. New Shmoo, like that one too. I tried ranking them, but it's just a mess. I got halfway down. I'm like, oh no, this one's better. And I wrote it, so I should have done it on a computer first. Yeah, I'll end it there.
I personally liked Fangface the character, especially when he went from the baby to like baby Fangface. Oh, that was so cute. So cute. And I love Shmoo. I want my own Shmoo so that, like, you know, if I need something, he can just turn into it and help me out. You know, like when the spider was in my car and I needed help, he could have protected me from that spider. Scott, did you enjoy any of these shows or concepts from the shows?
Hated every one of them. No, every season, I was like Joel, every season that the cartoons came out, I was like, I would sit down and draw my own, okay, they're doing this season, so I've got to come up with a show like this. And I would always, do that on my own, even up to the time. I mean, I watched all these shows all the way up through the time I left home and went to college, and I was still watching them. So I never stopped watching it. I was always amazed at the concepts, and how kind of weirdly figured out it was, or how weirdly figured out it wasn't, and that's what intrigued me about it. I love the design of everything because, it was my mentor that designed every one of those shows, or at least had a hand in most of them, Ewo, and there was nothing ever wrong with it, except what Wendy said. The title sequences were brilliant. The theme songs were brilliant. They were perfect. They made you come running in from the kitchen with your bowl of cereal, and it's, oh, that show's on now, and I got to see it. And I have gone through from the time I was a little kid, and I'll agree with Wendy on this one too, to the time, well, to even to nowadays, I still watch it. Those title sequences are flawless because they were all animated in-house by, people that knew what they were doing. And they had the disadvantage of, like, Funky Phantom was the first show that was ever done completely out of the country. And then they also did the second season of Scooby-Doo movies as well, done at the Australian outfit. And they just really kind of didn't have it figured out. By the time they got to Clue Club, they knew what they were doing, because that's why you say Pepper's Walk is a lot better. So they had other people that were, very instrumental in that. But I, like I said, I always looked at the title sequence. I'm like, why can't Speed Buggy look like this all the way through? Why doesn't Goober and the Ghost Chasers has an amazing title sequence, but the show is like, it's like a 6-year-old was tracing, doing the in-betweens. We were talking about, I think, I was suggesting episodes for Wendy to watch, and I told her there's a Captain Caveman episode. The first episode, there's like somebody that, like, they did a pencil. There's one scene where he goes into the RV, or their van, or whatever you want to call it, and he's like putting a key away, and he's supposed to put it in the safe, but he puts it in a pickle jar, and they've got this background of the inside of the RV, and it's like somebody just did, like, it was a quick sketch of the background. This was going to look like, they just threw color on it because they didn't have time to get it done. And then there's like scenes where you can see like the numbers of the exposure numbers on the bottom of the screen, so it's like, and they never, it's probably because they were right up to the wall, and they never took retakes on it, and they had to get it on the air. That's why there's that one episode you guys went over, the Scaredy Cats. What is it?
Vampire
Bats and Scaredy Cats.
Yeah, that's the first broadcast of that, was because they had to get it on the air. And then later on, they're like, well, we'll do retakes, in a month. And then that's why you've got two different versions of that show. That happened all the time. But the thing, like I said, that really bothered me, I mean, the premise of these shows, I loved every one of them. I thought, whether it was a, you know, a thin version of Scooby or not, you know, I just love the idea behind it. You know, even, I mean, as much as I don't like Buford Files, it's still a cool idea. You know, it's still got its own thing, you know. Same thing with Fangface, all of it. Fangface, you know, Clue Club really, I was so like, what was that, 76? I was like, yeah, I guess I just turned 16. But that like breathed new life into me. I was like, oh, this is like another Scooby show, and it's really well done. And you know, I liked it a lot. There's not one, I mean, I was really, I really favored Josie and the Pussycats a lot. I really favored, even though that's not a true spinoff, Speed Buggy and Jabberjaw. I love those shows because of what they were. Funky Phantom was probably my favorite, but only after, I mean, it just had a different look to it, but I liked the characters, but the characters were like very sarcastic to one another because they were always fighting over the girl. And, you know, and trying to put, you know, trying to get Mudsie to be brave and do whatever he had to do. But I love the idea. I love the character designs and everything about it, even though it was like kind of tweaked because it was that overseas studio. But then when I got to the studio and saw what happened was on that show, Bill Hanna was very nervous about, this was the first show they'd sent out of the country completely like that. They would usually send, you know, sections of them. Some of the Abbott and Costello cartoons were done that way. I think they were done in Australia or maybe in Spain somewhere. And some of the Laurel and Hardys and Sinbad Juniors and stuff like that. But they hadn't done it, or Moby Dick, they hadn't done it completely. But Australia, Bill Hanna went and put money into that place, and that was, it was called, I think it turned into be Southern Star Productions, but at the beginning, it was Hanna-Barbera Australia is what it was called. So he got nervous, and he asked Iwo to like, okay, on weekends, can you take these scripts home and design the characters so that when we send it overseas, there's no margin for error at all. And that's what happened. So when I saw those models for that show, I was like, wow, it looked like the first season of Where Are You? Because Iwo did all those too. So that's, and I just love the character designs for some reason. It was like Scooby-Doo kind of like tweaked a little bit, you know, kind of turned on its ear, you know, a little bit. And, but yeah, I was really fond of that one because again, that was the first show that was inspired by Scooby. You know, I mean, that was really the first non-Scooby mystery cartoon. You know, but I like that one a lot. But yeah, but like I said, I was always disappointed because it just, looking at the title sequences and then looking at the actual show, it's just like, wow, just very disappointing. You know, because of the way it was executed. And you know, like I said, as I got older, I understood why, because they just didn't have the manpower to do it, you know, because you did have that golden era, like around Scooby time, that every show, I'm surprised that the quality came out as good as it did, you know, like in the 69, I think around 72 is when everything, I think, stopped being done in this country and it just went south, you know, where the quality just really dropped off, and you kind of like really sad because again, pretty cool concepts. I mean, I'll even go up to like what, 78, 79 when they were doing like Yogi Space Race and stuff. Cool idea, but just bad execution, you know. Galaxy Goof Ups and all that stuff, you know. Even when they redid Space Ghost and Herculoids in the Space Stars show, it's like a lot of potential there, but it's just like, whoa, you know, just didn't have the oomph of the original shows, you know, that you remembered so well. But you know, again, I think what happened was it just, and I don't know how they went from one point to another, because even in those years, like 69, 67, 68, 69, they had so many shows on the air, and they were just handing out to anybody that could hold a pencil back then, I think. But those people all knew what they were doing, you know. And then you had kind of these novice people that they were just kind of throwing into the mix, and it just quality went down the tubes, you know. And it was very sad because, again, those shows didn't deserve that. You know, they were pretty valid concepts, pretty strong concepts. Character designs were amazing. The characters were really well thought out, really well designed, but they never got to reach the full potential with it. That was just very disappointing. But yeah.
Yeah. Final thoughts on these shows modeled after Scooby-Doo. Wendy?
Yeah, the one thing that I didn't mention earlier, Joel touched on it though, but didn't take it all the way. When it comes to like the musical cues, I think every single one of these has Scooby cues in it, but in every single one of them, it's like the wrong cues at the wrong time. They would be playing like a spooky Scooby cue, and they're just wrapping up the mystery, and like everything's all said and done, and you're like, wait a minute, no, this is the cue for like building anticipation, but we're done. Like, it's happened, you know? And so I felt like that was a very interesting kind of problem that I feel like all of those series ended up having, which was so strange because on Scooby, like, they're on point. There is not one single time in Scooby-Doo where I'm like, oh, that cue doesn't really fit what's going on, or I would have used this cue here. They're perfection. They fit so well, and I'm like, how did you guys screw that up? Like, literally from Josie onward, every single one of those shows suffers from that same thing, where it's just, and it's not even just that, oh, it's Scooby, so it's weird, because like that is a thing. Like Joel said, there are times where you're like, yeah, I don't want to be hearing that here. But even if we didn't know Scooby, we would still be watching these and being like, that cue doesn't belong here. It's not matching the vibe of the scene. So it's kind of, I mean, I guess maybe sometimes it's like you look at a family and there's more than one kid, and one kid is one way and the other kid is the other way, and you're just like, how did you grow up in the same house with the same parents? How's that even humanly possible that you could turn out that differently? Because usually one's like really well behaved and the other one's like a little a-hole sometimes that gets away with everything, and you're like, hey, you had the same parents. How did one of you get disciplined and the other one didn't? Like, how's that possible? So I kind of look at these series that way. I'm like, because there's a lot of crossover between who's working on them. I'm like, how did you guys do it so perfectly in Scooby, and then you like forgot what you were doing? I don't know. That's like a weird little thing that I wish we could go back in time and just like be flies on the wall in the studio to just like observe and see like, okay, this is how you did it in Scooby, and now let's watch these people trying to do it for something else and just like see what's going wrong, because something got like a little lost in the translation, I think. But I would encourage everybody that, even though obviously none of these are on par with Scooby, and they nothing ever will be, though, I do think that every single one of these series has enough merit to warrant you like at least checking it out and watching like an episode or two of it. I would definitely suggest you watch the first episode of everything and then pick another episode that just has like a fun title. Like Joel said, one of them, I can't even think of which series it is now, but there's a freaking Dracula. Dracula's in it. How are you not going to watch that? I've watched the Dracula one twice and I can't remember which show it's from. So that tells you how memorable the show itself is, but Dracula was really cool. So like, give them a shot. You're probably not, they're not going to be like your new favorite show, but it is also fun to see how, take it beyond Scooby, some of these shows you can look at them and be like, oh, that's what inspired this other thing that came after them. Because Clue Club, is it Dottie? Dottie's the little girl, right? Yeah. No one's going to tell me that Dottie was not the inspiration for Penny on Inspector Gadget. She even has cool gadgets that she talks to them with. She's Penny. She's got the same hairstyle as Penny. Penny has those very defined, like, poofy pigtails with a little point on them. Dottie is Penny. No one's going to convince me otherwise. Amazing Chan, their vehicle that shifts into different things, that's Inspector Gadget. It's the Gadget Mobile, turns into whatever. So it is fun to see the progression in animation where everything is, it is in a sense playing off of everything else. So even if they're not Scooby clones and spin-offs, they were definitely inspired by Scooby, and they in turn then inspired other animators and other writers and other artists to make things that were also equally wonderful, and they all have merit as well. So yeah, just because something is not a 10 doesn't mean that it's no good. There are a lot of like 6s and 7s out there, and you know what? Sometimes those are even better in a sense. They're not a 10, but you enjoy them more. So like give them a shot too. It doesn't have to just be, 10 out of 10 Scooby-Doo. There's definitely a lot of fun stuff in all of these other things, and you never know. You might find something that you really enjoy. Surprise yourself. But yeah, give them all a try. You can find them if you know where to look. You can find them all online and stuff. Just go check them out just for fun when you have nothing better to do.
Is it possible that these shows are what saved the Scooby franchise? They couldn't recreate Scooby, so they made more Scooby? Is that possible?
Yeah, that is possible. I mean, I think because when you look at the fact that they only did, a season and a half of Scooby originally, and then movies, that was about all the original stuff they did until 76, and all those shows were pretty much all the way up to that point. And then Scooby kind of took back over, and they spun everything off of Scooby, sorta, at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's valid.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Joel, your final thoughts on the shows modeled after Scooby?
Yeah, I agree with you too, saying this could have saved the Scooby franchise. Wendy, that episode with Dracula is the new Shmoo.
Yep, got it.
And I agree with you too, the cues are used in the wrong spots. Drove me bananas. All these episodes worth checking out, or all these series are worth checking out. Also, you can always hear your favorite voice actor doing some role in one of these. It's kind of cool, kind of distracting too sometimes. And if you have a favorite, I'd love to know, or if you have comments about any of these, make sure you leave them in the comments, because this isn't really a bigly or like a highly discussed item. Like I've seen YouTube videos on these, but they always just are very superficial and just gloss over everything. And I'm always interested in hearing what people who've seen this, like this whole thing's just been very fascinating to me, especially with Scott, who lived through this era. And it's just, I'm just caught up. I'm not so vocal today because I'm just really caught up in what Scott's saying and Wendy's observations and Nixie's observations as well.
I got a lot of wounds from watching those shows too. A lot of scars from
I believe it.
I've been, yeah, it's affected me on some weird level. So.
That's all I gotta say.
Scott, what are your final thoughts on the shows modeled after Scooby?
Well, I think the thing is like when I was a kid, I'm going back to that time again. With Hanna-Barbera cartoons, you always knew what you were going to get because they didn't change up one iota from one season to another. It was the same music, it was the same voices, it was the same idea. It was just kind of like taken up to that level of what was going on that year and what was big in pop culture at that point. And that's the thing that they always kind of like. I mean, like I said, some of the presentations that I have of things that were going on at the time, it's like, hey, let's do a show with John Bowser Bauman from Sha Na Na and put two polar bears that look like the Blues Brothers in it. Okay. I have a presentation for that. I have a copy of that. And it's like, anyway. But no, the thing is, like, my point is like, you always knew what you were going to get with a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Now, when I was little, they had, and I only saw them in comic books until a certain point. Well, until I started working at the studio. There was a show that they did not show in my area because my area was like, let's show Rocky and Bullwinkle and Underdog. The only Hanna-Barbera cartoons that I had in syndication were like Sinbad Jr., Abbott and Costello, and Laurel and Hardy. And that was, and the Flintstones. And that was kind of it. And except for the Saturday morning stuff. So there was this one syndicated package they put out in 64. Yeah. 64. Yes. Wait. 63 maybe. Somewhere in there. It was Wally Gator, Touche Turtle, and Lippy Lion and Hardy Har Har. Never saw those cartoons. And then there was another one called Loopy de Loop that was done in '59. And Loopy de Loop was the good wolf, and he was French, and he was like, everything is good, and no one is, you cannot be the bad wolf, and I will not be bad to the grandmama when I go see Red Riding Hood and all this other stuff. And then he would get the crap beat out of him because somebody would be like, wolf, and then they, Little Red Riding Hood would like to do a karate chop on him. That was the thing. But I'm the good wolf, and so yeah. So I never really saw those. I never saw the Touche Turtles, the Wally Gators, or the Lippy and Hardys. But reading the comic books, I knew exactly what that show was going to sound like. I knew what it was. I knew what it was going to look like, and having never seen it animated. Now, when I finally got to Hanna-Barbera, I hunted that show down, and I was like, I've got to see what these are. Exactly what I pictured it to be. It didn't sound any different. It didn't look any different. It was just all animated by the same guys that here's Ken Muse animation, and here's Carlo Vinci's animation, and it was like, yep, that's exactly what I knew it was going to look like. Okay, so that being said, it was kind of a comfort food in a way, because I knew that was a safe place. It was like I knew exactly what that show was going to be before I even saw it. And then again, thing too was like when I was about 8 years old and I had a tape recorder, I would actually tape the episodes, audio tape them, and then when I go into my room in the afternoon and draw, I would put those on in the background, and I was very tuned into what those sounded like. So when you get into the music cue part of it and say, what was that? It's like, okay, they had all those like really Hoyt Curtin. Those cues were actually really, really thought out, and they were put in the exact places because the music editors knew exactly where to put them. And sometimes they would slip up, and you're like, that doesn't sound right. I will go farther than what you guys were saying, though. As far as they were still kind of like, even up through the Pebbles and Bam Bam Hair Bear Bunch era, even up through Chan Clan, somewhere in there, they were starting to kind of fall off a little bit. But then, and again, I'm not ranking on the Scooby-Doo show, but in the beginning they had these really melodic, just music that played in the background, and it didn't really emphasize a whole lot, and that really bothered me. It was just melodic stuff, and it wasn't like emphasizing the scenes as much. And again, because I was very tuned into the sound of it as opposed to just the visual, that always bothered me as well. And when they would repeat cues like crazy, but again, that was a comfort area for me, because it's like, well, this is a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. This is what it's supposed to sound like. This is why they're using that same music cue from Johnny Quest in Space Ghost of the Herculoids. And I was like, I'm there, have no problem. I love the Huck Finn, New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn show. That was a year before Scooby premiered. They took all that incidental music and put it into Scooby. And they had maybe 10 new cues for Scooby. And they repeat those all the time. But then they ran those in the ground too, from, like you said, all those other shows. Funky Phantom was the exception to the rule, because I don't know how much of that was edited in Australia before it got here. But I know sometimes they would put their own music in that they wrote, because they did the theme song over there for Funky Phantom. Same guys who did the theme song for that. There was another cartoon called Around the World in 80 Days that they produced. And they wrote the same theme song, the same guy singing it, that sang the Funky Phantom theme. But they would just kind of arbitrarily shoot those Scooby cues into Funky Phantom where it just really didn't make any sense. And I'm chalking that up to like, well, they were a new production company and they kind of just, they were doing their best. I don't know how much of that stuff was changed when it got back, because I think Bill was just very happy that it came back and it was airable. So he probably didn't change anything. And I don't think they really edited the music here like they did on the other shows. But that was the thing too. Like those guys were also, there was just a whole team that's all they did was throw those music cues in, and they knew those things like the back of their hand. We've got this one, we've got this one, this one, we can use this for, this is the type of scene. And and it's wall-to-wall music too. It's not just like, it does not ever stop and start. It's boom, and it goes to the end of the show. And that's what we used to call wall-to-wall music. And there was a lot of times where, well, we don't want that. You know, it's like, well, keeps the show going. And the other thing too is like the voice work and the music really carried the shows because the animation sometimes did. So you kind of had to have really strong things that made you pay attention, you know, because you didn't want to pay attention to like, you know, don't look over here too close because it's not that great, you know, so. But that's, you know, that's the way too. Like I said, in my case, I knew what I was getting with every Hanna-Barbera show. I loved everything they did, everything except Nugget Nose. That's about the only one that I can't really tolerate. But, and that was part of Yogi Space Race at one point. I just can't even almost be in the same room with that cartoon for some reason. I don't know what it is. And Frank Welker does the voice of Nugget Nose. Nothing against Frank. I just don't like the character. It was Laverne and Shirley with a hermit that was a ghost and he was looking for gold. And you had Mr. Fuddy that was worked on this. They worked on this dude ranch that was a hotel. And it just, why? You know, there was nothing else to it. Yeah. But anyway, but no, I loved everything they did. I mean, I liked the designs for that show. So that's all that yeah. I can't say that I hated it completely. But, you know, again, you knew what you were getting. And whether it was, you know, Yogi Bear type characters, Huckleberry Hound type characters that went all the way up through like 65 with, you know, even with ending with Adamant and Secret Squirrel and Squiddly Diddly and all those characters. You had that, and you had the superhero stuff for a brief time because a lot of groups didn't like it. Then you had the more slapstick shows like Wacky Races and Penelope Pit Stop and Dasher Mountain and her Flying Machines and Scooby. And then boom, Scooby takes it a whole different direction and, you know, and goes through the mystery stuff, you know, and then they, you know, start branching out a little bit more. Let's make another version of the Flintstones. Let's do Pebbles and Bam Bam. Let's do Hair Bear Bunch. Let's do stuff like that. Let's get back to, you know, doing kind of goofy shows. And then they got into the whole, you know, what I used to call the, well, not a nice name, but I used to call them the Saturday morning gangbang shows that they would do, where they would be like 90 minutes of like, okay, we're going to do Richie Rich, Munchie Cheese, Pac-Man, and Scooby and Scrappy are all going to be on one 90-minute show or a 2-hour show. Scooby's Laugh Olympics was that way. You know, and no show had anything to do with the other. It just, here's a block of Hanna-Barbera programming that we're going to put on. And again, I loved all those things. You know, let's do Fonz and Happy Days Gang, Mork and Mindy, Laverne and Shirley out 90-minute show. You know, and again, you know, so it you know, they had places to fill, you know, fill with programming, and that's all they did, you know, and thank God that they were able to turn out that much stuff, I guess, for the networks. But then there, you know, there was a time where the network wasn't really happy with Hanna-Barbera. There was the season that Great Babe, Tom and Jerry Great Babe came on in '75. That's the only new show they did that season. There was some rift between them and the networks. Nobody wanted to work with them, and they would rerun. They reran, I think, Speed Buggy that season on some place, and maybe Josie or something, or Scooby was definitely still on. But for some reason, Hanna-Barbera only did an hour of Tom and Jerry and Great Babe. I don't know what I never did find out what was behind that. I never really thought to ask, I guess. But then the next season, they came back with a vengeance because it was Scooby, Laugh Olympic, or Scooby and Dynamite, and then I don't know what else they had out that they had stuff on all the channels again. So they just maybe needed to take a breather, you know, and the networks were just kind of tired of like, well, every show looks like a Hanna-Barbera show. So, and there was a really weird block of Saturday morning programming that was live action too at one point. You know, they had like all these weird live action shows like Kids from Caper and Monster Squad and Big John, Little John, which was a Sherwood Schwartz Brady Bunch, Gilligan's Island guy created the show where this guy found the fountain of youth and drank it and he turned into a little kid. You know, it was Cousin Oliver from Brady Bunch was a little kid, and Herb Edelman, I think, played the big version of him, and he would go back and forth and at random times. I'm like, and there was a lot of weird live action shows like that that just took away from animation completely. And you had like NBC did that, and they would run like Pink Panther and Woody Woodpecker, and then the rest of it was live action stuff. So they were getting away from animation for some reason, but yeah. I don't know where that was going, but that's my final thoughts on, but like I said, to me, it was very much a comfortable, a very, very safe place to go with those shows. It just gave me because that's the way it's what I grew up with, and that's what I grew up loving, and everything they did, and I knew what I was getting, and they never failed to deliver. I mean, the context of the show was one thing, but the concept was another, so yeah.
Well, we appreciate your expertise and the behind the scenes information that you're giving us, because it's cool to learn about all this stuff, and it's, we're very interested in all of that. So thank you.
Sure.
My final thought is these shows made me appreciate Scooby-Doo more. And I'm very thankful that I have so much Scooby to watch, and I don't necessarily have to go back and watch these shows. Not that they're awful, just that, I don't know, I just couldn't really get into them, Just had a hard time getting into them. So we're going to wrap things up. Before we do, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, and Wendy, we'll start with you.
On Instagram, I'm at WendyBRYDGE. On Twitter X, I'm Wendy Loves Jesus, and my blog is wendylovesjesus.wordpress.com.
Joel?
You can find me on YouTube. Just type in Planet Scooby.
Scott?
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Scott Jade's Retro Cartoons, where I draw fantasy comic book covers of all the classic characters.
Amazing fantasy comic book covers. They should be real comics.
Well, you never.
And you can find all my links on ScoobyAddicts.com. Be sure to let us know your thoughts on these shows. Watch them. They're worth at least watching. And thank you for joining us for another Scooby Panel. Thank you for tuning in to another Scooby Panel. I'm Nikki Blake from ScoobyAddicts.com. If you like these panels, please subscribe to my channel for more great discussions. A huge shout out to our patrons, Julie Rosen, Ross from ScoobyFan.net, Tagus, Elizabeth Maloney, Garrett Spencer, and Paul the Scooby Dude. If you would like to support the Scooby Panel, please go to patreon.com/ScoobyAddicts. A very special thank you to artist, blogger, and Scooby collector Wendy Bridge, Joel from Planet Scooby, an Emmy Award-winning animation producer, director, and comic book artist, Scott Jeralds. Scooby Panel is available in podcast form on most podcast platforms or as a web series on YouTube. You can find Scooby Panel on Instagram, Facebook, and X as @ScoobyPanel. We are part of the Collector's Maze Network, where you can find all things geek. Scooby and Shaggy were voiced by Scott Innes. Check out Scott's website, onescottshop.com. Scooby Addicts artwork by Will Davenport. Scooby Panel logo by Garrett Spencer. Video editing by Nikki Blake. Music composed and performed by Bovine Nightmares. Please join us next time for another Scooby Panel.